Good morning, Alwyn.
Morning, Rodney.
It's so lovely to have you on. You have been such a help to me over many, many, many years. You have been inspirational to me, what you do, and I've always got to add your wife because it's a team, and the teachers that you gather around you with education. You do such an amazing job. It's appalling when you go in and see what is happening in education, and it's doubly appalling when you realise that it's not about money, and it doesn't have to be like this, and you have demonstrated over and over and over again what is possible. You think you can't get through to the bureaucracy, and you can't, and I'm afraid I come to a conclusion that they actually don't care. They don't care about what's best for the kids. And of course, these days, everyone lacks courage to tell the truth. You're not a man that lacks courage. You bravely speak the truth, and at huge cost and consequences to yourself. You are an inspiration. It's lovely to have you on this hour, and I'd like you to begin telling us and listeners how you got into education and your experience through till now in education, and then we'll get into policy. So you start, and I'll interrupt occasionally with a few questions.
Yeah, well, I had to say I'm a little worried because about 10 minutes ago, you were talking about experts and that you were sick of the word, and then you called me an expert. So,
I should say this, Alwyn. Maybe I should use the word expertise.
Okay.
You have expertise. And the difference with you is you're not a media government labelled expert.
Right.
You're actually an expert by demonstration. And we do need a sort of a government expert or someone that the media labels an expert. You're the real deal. My point is you have actually done it. So you go.
Okay. So, you said how I got into teaching. I'd do exactly the same thing today if I was 20 rather than 50 odd. Starting at the end point and what you've just, the conversation you've had, I think it was John, this is the best time ever on the planet to grow up. You say that and you'll hear people go, oh, hang on a second, what about what's happening in Ukraine and what about COVID and goodness, global warming, and you got to be off your rocker to think this is the best time to grow up. But there is so much statistical evidence that it is. Best fed, longest living, best opportunities for education, now restoring the best opportunities to travel, to live in different places, huge variety of careers that people can go into, massive understanding of how to educate, how human beings develop. But you're right, it's actually really difficult to get a positive story out there. And, I didn't go to good schools growing up. I had, some okay teachers in high school, but one very good teacher. And he ended up, he was my economics teacher. I guess it's one of those stories so I went and did an economics degree. But I loved teaching, and I made a deliberate choice to move away from being, a professional economist. So I wasn't bad academically, and that could have been a pathway I'd taken. But to go and teach, and I think the other thing that was incredibly helpful to me is that when I started teaching at Tauranga Boys College, they were superbly led by a man called Graham Young. And I had other excellent role models. Robert Mangan, who has just resigned or retired from being the principal of Tauranga Boys, was at that point the head of sport, the head of PE, had a work ethic like I didn't know existed. And so you had these wonderful people that I learnt my trade from.
Just interrupting there, Alwyn, isn't that interesting? Because that's how I remember my childhood. I grew up in Rangiora, North Canterbury. My father was a truck driver there. And yet I recall my childhood as being surrounded by men I admired.
Mm-hmm.
And they were men that might be a school teacher, a standout school teacher, work colleagues, neighbours, who were men's men who I just wanted to be like, who seemed to me to be brave and strong and always doing the right thing and very knowledgeable and capable. And then you would read, and you'd read of other Kiwis, and your rugby players, to me, were role models. And I just grew up knowing what I wanted to become. I wanted to be like them.
Yeah. Yep. And so I've been doing some work this year. I know it's sort of a little bit of a divergence, but with the great Rod Dixon.
Yes.
And the reason that we're doing it, and effectively what we're doing is, probably once a week, once a fortnight, we're interviewing Kiwi sporting greats. So we've done people like Erin Baker and her American husband, Scott, who both were Ironman champions. We spent a brilliant hour with Sir Brian Williams because, from the 1976 water polo test, I was Brian Williams for the next few years. And I talked to Brian. We called it "This is our life" because he was such a role model. And I played against his Auckland team when he was coaching. I coached the University Premier team against his Ponsonby side. And as I said to him, look, at last, because we gave them a hiding one day at Western Springs. And I said, at last, I thought I got one over BG. And walk into the after-match function, and here he is, smiling, shaking everyone's hands, buying people lemonades, and I just went, wow. And he said to me during this interview, he said, yeah, I was smiling on the outside. But I was determined that wasn't going to happen again. And the reason that Rod and I are doing it, of course, Rod, Olympic bronze medalist in 1972, was a part of that wonderful trio with John Walker and Dick Quacks. Plus you had the women, Alison Rowe, Lorraine Moller, Anne O'Dane, and many others, Barbara Moore. And that just iconic race where Rod won the New York Marathon by 8 seconds, coming from minutes back. And what we've discussed and why we're doing it is because, particularly of pay-per-view television, lots of kids don't know these people. They don't even know their current heroes. They don't have current heroes because they don't get to see them. And even the Commonwealth Games that's on now, I wonder what proportion of children are going to get to watch it. And, I had to admit to Rod that, in 1984 for the Los Angeles Games, I didn't go to school for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to watch.
You think there's something happened there? Do you think what I feel is I don't connect to the current sports people. When I would see Brian Williams or Rod Dixon, I thought of him or Lauren Moller or I just thought of them as people down the road. I felt I knew them. I could identify them. I thought of them as very, very good, but they weren't on a different planet to me. When I look at sports people now, there's nothing, very, very seldom is there something attractive about their lifestyle or them, and I don't identify them. And I particularly feel that way with the professional rugby players.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think at the university club I coached, I think 14 players who were World Cup level players for Japan, for Tonga, for Samoa, and for New Zealand. And in that group, I mean, I still regard them as very good friends, and as good people. One of them, Aliota Fumoana Sapolo, who, extremely intelligent, very outspoken, incredible rugby player for Samoa, for Gloucester. I think he also played for Sale and in Japan. But outspoken and vilified, but people fail to acknowledge that his courage changed the World Cup draw by speaking out for the Tier 2 nations. And late in his life, I sort of started as a business relationship, but also developed into a friendship with Martin Crowe. And I think these people, so Marty the same. Well, I mean, what a tremendous cricketer.
Yes.
But because he had a different way of looking at life, he again was often vilified and felt it deeply personally. So I wonder if some of what you're talking about is athletes protecting themselves a bit.
Yes.
Yes.
And and of course they're very young.
Oh, totally.
And to have that accolade and attention when you're young. Let's we'll come back to sport because it's so interesting culturally and what it means for young people and what it means to be growing up. But you got into education, and how did you find it?
Yep.
You were a school teacher.
Oh, look, I absolutely have I don't regard myself as having worked a day in my life.
I'm the same,
and that doesn't mean that there hasn't been challenges. That doesn't mean that I've always got it right. You mentioned Mount Hobson Middle School. There were a few families who would say, "Hey, it didn't work for us," and you have to take that on the chin, and you have to sit down and go, "Okay, goodness, what did we get wrong? And how do we correct that?" As I said, Tauranga Boys was a neat start because Graham just let me do not whatever I wanted, but whatever I thought I ought to do. So, I coached the first 15. I went on the board of trustees because I thought it'd be cool to learn about that. I was still studying. Karen and I had, 3 children under 3. But again, you get tired and you're working hard, but it doesn't seem like work. My second job at Hamilton Boys was again productive, but the leadership was different, and I guess more controlling, and I didn't enjoy that particularly much. And St Cuthbert's in Auckland made me an offer I couldn't refuse, and I taught there for a wonderful 4 years. Loved teaching. The girls loved, their sincerity in terms of learning and their aspiration, and clearly learned some of the reasons why girls do quite a lot than boys in New Zealand education. But in behind all of that, I was doing some research papers and some study and looking at the New Zealand system. So you've got to remember this is probably 20 years ago now, and my conclusions wouldn't be entirely the same. But the basic conclusion was that our primary schooling, our first 6 years was okay. Our last 3 years, the qualification structure, again, if you place a kid in good shape at the beginning of year 11 with a good approach, they're going to do fine in almost any school. Back then, I pretty much would have said any school. I think that's changed. I think there's a lower tier of schools that would best be bulldozed and start again. And so, to me, the big issue was a crucial development period that we identify in New Zealand as year 7 to 10. We've never had any academic data for year 9 and 10s. We just regarded it as a holding period. We briefly had data for year 7 and 8 through national standards, and that showed that year 7 and 8 was a disaster in our system. So I designed a middle school model, went to the ministry and said, guys, here's a great model. And that was my first interaction with the ministry. And they said, basically talk to the hand because the ears aren't listening. And I said, well, someone's kind of got to do something with it. So that's when we sold everything we had and set up the wee school that you came to on a number of occasions.
What year did you start that, Alwyn?
About 2003.
And you must have been, you put everything into it, everything on the line for that school.
Oh, we did, and we still had 3 young kids, and there were some very sort of funny experiences when you look back. The first one being, so we found this building on Renewville Road. Now, our hope and the real blessing of the charter school, partnership school model, was that we could take this excellent model to Manurewa and to Henderson, where it's thriving and where the kids are thriving. But we had to start somewhere. And so this was a leasehold property, and we understood the issues with that. And after 18 years, we've actually moved our operation to the top of Queen Street. We put it out there, but when we bought the building, we, were pretty excited. And we couldn't go there on the Friday evening because we had some appointments out of town. And so we went on the Saturday after we'd got the keys and go down the driveway, and I throw the keys to my 10-year-old son and say, go and check it out. And the 3 of them, race off as kids do. And suddenly he comes back and goes, oh, you didn't need the keys, you haven't got any doors. and the night before, clearly a very professional operation had come in and removed every piece of kauri they could find in the building. And it just looked like a bomb site. They'd removed all of the skirting boards and things like that by punching a hole in the wall above, and And so, we rang our insurance agent. You can imagine how pleased they were. We weren't allowed to make changes or improvements until November, and yet such was the need, and I guess we specialised there in children that you would now call neurodiverse. Such was the need that we had people enrolling in this bomb site, and we were full in 18 months.
And parents who were desperate.
There's talk, particularly at the moment around attendance and things like that. A lot of blame towards parents. I've never ever met a parent that doesn't want their child to do well at school.
Never.
That doesn't mean that they're always functionally equipped to see that happen. But I don't think we should ever go down the path saying parents don't care. I haven't met a parent that doesn't care.
No, and you can be a Mungal mob member or completely down and out. You can be poverty-stricken in the back streets of Calcutta, but you want your kids to be educated and do better than you.
Correct.
You started the school, and I have a particular memory of it where I met a former colleague of mine, and she was there with her young son, who had been completely failing at every school he went to. She was ecstatic to see me, to tell me how great your school was, and you changed her boy's life. He was the Ducks.
Yeah.
Because you somehow, with enthusiasm and a little bit of magic and interest, you turned him on to school.
Yeah. So some of those things are important. I think earlier on in the conversation, you mentioned the team of people that we've been able to bring around us.
Yes.
Across our 3 school structures at the moment, I think we had probably around 80 staff. It was interesting last year. So we always wanted to do, because we want to reach kids who other people struggle to reach. That's one of our key goals. And we had in mind watching the technology change an online school. And also watching what was going on with mandates and things like that. And I said to, someone reasonably senior in the ministry that as a principal, I would have no interest in knowing, because it's a medical procedure and I'm not actually allowed to ask, no interest in knowing whether my teachers are vaccinated or not.
No.
What I do want to know is if they are sick or not.
Yes.
Because, that's the key point, and that's always been the key point. And so, because I'm, it's going to sound like a big deal, but because I'm not actually in the classroom at present, it was probably a little bit token. But the minute that Chris Hipkins announced the mandate for teachers, I said to emailed Leslie Hoskin, the head of the Teachers Council, and said, I don't believe teachers should be treated this way. Please accept my resignation for my teacher certificate. And I guess, then sat down and said, now's the time to launch an online school, because I'm not going to be the only one.
Mm.
And so we put together a group of staff, and I don't know whether they're vaccinated or not. I didn't ask. But a group of staff who, are amazing, wanted a different opportunity in education, weren't happy with how they or their colleagues were being treated. And we launched an online school nationwide. And going back to what you said about, this young man at Mount Hobson who had thrived, it's always been a team effort.
Mm.
And, I guess I've gone at times into the public sector, sometimes, as you say, at great cost. And some of the media...
But great leaders have great teams.
Oh, absolutely. I think.
And great leaders acknowledge the team.
Yes, and then the other thing is that the model that we use is absolutely world class, and I know that because I've travelled with it and discussed it with people in different countries. Prior to COVID, we'd get up to 300 visitors a year to South Auckland Middle School. We'd have teacher groups come from places like Texas, Hong Kong, Indonesia, and the model suits middle school education. We haven't gone down the whole student-led way with inquiry learning, because you can't know what you don't know. And for a lot of kids defining, absolutely. But we do have, our Year 7 to 10 program is 32 cross-curricular projects that we use alongside subjects. And because if you don't have the subjects, you're doing a big disadvantage to the students, because year 11 to 13 and university study is siloed. And will be for the foreseeable future. So it's a really thorough, interesting, rigorous program, and I think that makes a huge difference. And we put incredible thought in, how we teach the basics of math and reading, but also incredible thought in how we treat the students as human beings.
Yes.
And so at South Auckland Middle School and Middle School West Auckland, for instance, we only have 15 in the class. They are students in Decile 1 areas. We provide uniform, stationery and IT, and people think that that's a response
to poverty. Let's just back up the truck a little bit, Alwyn.
Yep.
Because you had the middle school and then you expanded.
Yep.
And we're now talking about your expanded schools. So you got the middle school running brilliantly, and then you set up other schools. How many did you set up?
So we had an opportunity within the partnership school model to apply twice. And in 2013, very late, we got the contract to set up South Auckland Middle School. And in 2004, so that began in 2014. And then the second one, Middle School West Auckland, began in 2015.
And when you say Decile 1, because people outside of education, Decile 1 doesn't mean anything, that means by the ministry standards, a lower income area, the lowest income area.
Correct. That's right.
A rich area like Remuera or Fendleton is a Decile 10, and a Decile 1 is a community where incomes are low, and typically the kids don't do as well as the average at school.
Yeah, and I have never thought that that's acceptable. And, people tend to say, and it gets called deficit thinking, that, what can you do? They're from a poor family, their parents didn't have an education and all that sort of stuff. And my, pretty sharp response is, but that's what state school education exists for. If you can't make a difference, and so that's the approach that we've taken into those two areas, and we have seen children, again through the model and through the team, we have seen children just thrive and love it, and we haven't. So over the years, 97% of the children from Mount Hobson Middle School have got level 1 NCEA when they've moved out, which is a great result because, as you say, a lot have come to the school without that looking like their pathway, and those results have continued. We didn't dumb down anything when we went to South Auckland Middle School or Middle School West Auckland. We made it just as tough, and the children have responded. They come in on average 2 years behind.
No.
If you do some testing, and our data shows that we're catching them up 1.5 years for each year with us.
That's
and
amazing.
Again, the how.
Just say that again.
It's cool.
So your kids are coming into these schools, your school.
Yeah.
They are 2 years behind what the middle school in Mount Hobson would have been, or 2 years behind the average?
No, 2 years behind 2 years behind national norms.
Wow. And within one and a half years, on average, they've caught that up.
Over 4 years, they our graduates. So our average NCA level 1 pass rate for the people who leave, have left South Auckland Middle School, is just under 90%. And again, that's a phenomenal achievement.
It's phenomenal.
And the how is, the really rigorous model. As I was saying, we provide uniform, stationery and IT. It's not about poverty. It's about, for those kids, reducing the number of microaggressions that they suffer every day. And the tension of being poorly dressed, the tension of worrying about the fact that you haven't got a pencil in the pencil case.
As part of the money that you get, which is probably less than an ordinary school gets, you provide a uniform and stationery.
Yep.
So that's gone.
And we make sure there's no IT costs. No bring your own device that you have to pay for and things like that. We also, some things, we now know, so much more than we did 20, 30 years ago about how children learn and about the plasticity of the brain. And there's one policy I really want to talk to you about. But so we say to our teachers, and we're very careful with language, and some of this will almost sound authoritarian, but that when the children come into the school, and they're going to be there for 4 years, we've got almost no. So in South Auckland, there's about 40% transients within a year. We've got less than 4%. And when the children come into the school, and we discover that they're not so flash at math, they're not so flash at something else, we tell our teachers that they must assume that that's environmental until we know otherwise, and that it can improve. And so, if a teacher in our school says, well, vulnerability students, they really have misspoken, because I don't think there is a low ability child in that sense. I mean, there's so much that you can get out of a child. And I've seen it time and time again. And also, 15 in the class makes a big difference. They're in a villa, so South Auckland Middle School is 180 students. That's what we're limited to. We've got so many on the waiting list that has to be police balloted each year, and the wait list doesn't shift.
So let's recap for a minute where we've got to. You're running a school limited by the government to 180 students. You're running it in the poorest areas of New Zealand by their own standards. The pupils are coming in on average 2 years behind the New Zealand norm. You're providing these children with an education. At the schools around you, there's a 40% transient rate, which I guess is 40% of the kids are turning over, is it, a year or something. At your school, it's 4%. Yep. They come into your school and they don't leave. And then I've got this figure wrong, you catch up the norm, did you say 1.5 years?
No, so 1.5 years per year with us. So
I see. So they do, they go 50% faster.
Yeah.
50% faster. Now, ordinarily, if you cared about kids and their education, if you cared about poverty, if you cared about improving schooling and opportunities, every politician in New Zealand would be pouring down into your schools, and every bureaucrat would be pouring into your schools. Every principal would be pouring into your school and thinking, how can we do better?
I agree. There are others as well. So, one of the wee jobs I do each year, and I'm currently doing it, is I receive a raw data set of the levers achievements for every high school in New Zealand. And depending on the sort of, metric that you rank on, effectively it ends up looking like a league table. And whoever, either uses it or purchases it from me, one of the caveats is that I ask them not to publish it as a league table, just simply because it's not helpful. It's a really key instrument for schools to use to improve their own situation. But one of the neat things about it is discovering other outstanding schools. So Manakura in Palmerston North gets incredible results. The integrated Catholic system, their results as a group. So there are decile 1 Catholic schools with better results than the newest decile 10 state schools that cost $50 million each.
Unbelievable. Well, it's not unbelievable when you know what's going on, is it?
Oh, that's accurate. No, it's not. But so I think you're right about beating a pathway to the door of these schools. And you know, when I did this, I rang up a gentleman called Nathan Jury, who's been instrumental in Manakura, and I just said, "What are you guys doing? You know, how are your results so good? What do you do to bring them about?" And same, like I communicate often with James Bentley from St. Tina's in Epsom. And one of the neat things about his school is that they're pretty darn good at sport. They're the leading first 15 in Auckland at the moment. But there's a lot of boys' schools around the country who are good at sport. But in those other boys' schools, less than half of their students leave school with university entrance, sort of as a pattern. But at St. Peter's, it's well over 90% leave with university entrance. And it's just like, again, James, what do you do to keep such a brilliant balance? And you're right, those are questions that every official, every politician should be seeking.
And do they?
I don't think so. I think, unfortunately, your summary at the beginning, we've been told directly to our faces by senior ministry officials that their key job is to protect the minister. Surely your key job is to ensure children are well educated. The Ministry of Education, there are some really good frontline people, and I'm going to say no one goes into a job to do a bad job, but they have gone from 2,800 bureaucrats 5 years ago to 3,900 now, overseeing a system that's been in almost free fall during those 5 years. So you imagine that, Ian Foster gets a bit of people grizzling at him at the moment. Why don't we grizzle about the leadership of the ministry?
It is amazing, isn't it? Because the All Blacks are still a great team, but our schooling system is falling apart. It's not even close when you benchmark it against the rest of the world or even the best in New Zealand. And we all we don't know, and we don't hold anyone to account. And that's much more important. As much as we love rugby, it's much more important.
Oh, hugely more important.
And we, as a parent, we can't even find out what's going on. We can't even find out what's going on in the school. I got little kids, they've gone back to primary school. Alwyn helped me when I was homeschooling them, which I absolutely loved, but they decided they liked their kids at school, and so they go off to school. But I get more emails from the school than I can handle, but I actually don't know what's going on in the classroom.
Yeah.
I don't know what's happening with sex education. I'm a bit horrified what they come home with at primary school. They know all about trans rights and they know all about being non-binary. And you're thinking, where the heck? Oh, no, we had that in school. and no one, that's quite sensitive, right? I wish I knew that they were learning about non-binary rights. But this school system, when you say it's in free fall, I don't think people listening realise how in free fall it is. Share us the key data that tells us it's in free fall at the moment.
Well, I've just done a summary. I receive a lot of help from some people who are effectively within the ministry, and they want to see improvement. So we've now got to the situation. So I see university entrance one as a key qualification level, but two is a real indicator. So if you take that by ethnicity, you've got 67% of Asian students achieve that qualification.
67% of Asian students get university entrance, okay?
Yep. 44% of European, which I think is atrocious.
Less than
25%
half. Less than half.
Yep. 25% of Pacific students and 19% of Māori. And we've actually got into the situation where, so in 2020, Māori school leavers in New Zealand, 33% of them didn't have level 2 NCEA, which really is a pretty basic qualification. And in 1 year, so from the 2021 leavers, it's gone up to 37.2% of Māori school leavers. And if you've got your ear on the railway track at all for this year, it doesn't sound any better.
So let's just understand this for people that went to school when we had school cert. What would be the standard of NCA level 2? But you're reading right?
It's difficult to match up. So obviously there's been some real concerns with basic numeracy and basic literacy, and so effectively there are a couple of new exams, tests being brought in that people have to pass to show, I guess you would call it, functionality. Excuse me, in both of those things. And I think that comes in 2024. One of the issues, when I could explain the system.
No. It's just, I'm trying to, because
it shouldn't be that complex. So you're just saying, hey, look, 25, just under 25% of Māori leave school with no qualification whatsoever, not even level 1 NCA. So they've, in theory, been in school for 11 years for nothing.
Unbelievable. And something like $10,000 a year has been spent on each child.
Yeah. Again, we know how to make a difference. As I said, there's...
Well, this is the problematic thing to me. I've always been in my life thinking, assuming everyone has good motives, and that what we have is, maybe an ideology shrouding people's judgment, or politics shrouding people's judgment, or just a lack of knowledge. And that if you explain to people, look, we can do this is how it would work, and yet I've now realised I'm coming to a conclusion which is very hard for me to come to, that they're actually bad actors. Because there you are, and other schools, that can demonstrate how you can reach out to every one of those students with very few exceptions and have them succeed. It requires no extra money. It requires probably less money. It requires a relinquishing of control and dictate. And there are people there that can do it in droves. And yet, and I'm now going to put you on the spot because I've observed you for many, many years, the ministry and the politicians, some of them close to me, have resolutely blocked you, frustrated you, got in your way, downplayed your success and your achievement, prevented your kids from succeeding because they won't provide the proper funding. They have made it very, very hard because, and I'll tell you why, you show them up. You and your team and your students show up, not just the mediocrity of many of our schools and school systems, but their complete neglect and failure. You are the sort of like the shining example. You're the sort of West Berlin or the Hong Kong against the madness, and they can't stand it because. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you the most bizarre example of that. And yes, it happens. You know, I am reaching out at the moment about our model to senior ministry people and I think making some progress. I am talking to, I've got an education summit in a couple of weeks' time that's small, that's a rolling debate with, you know, some of the education interested MPs who are currently in opposition. And so there are things going on in the background. The online school that we have that anyone can enrol in from anywhere in New Zealand and receive the same program is going superbly well. But over the last 2 years, so not this year, 2 previous years, we applied for a designated character school for 480 neurodiverse learners, neurotransport hub in Auckland, desperately needed, showed ridiculous levels of demand. And I thought, right, how do we get some political clout? So I went to, you know, email contacted Chloe Swarbrick and said, can you get behind this? It would just be such a good thing for Auckland Central and such a good thing for kids, and you identify as being neurodiverse, and I thought, surely. And she came back and said, no, because you've spoken against me and green policies at times, I'm not prepared to support you.
So she puts her own little feelies and her own political thing to bully you at the expense of 400 kids.
Yes, she wasn't opposing me. She was opposing,
of course,
a massive improvement in education for 480 kids who are struggling in Auckland schools.
And I have to say to you, it's not just the Green MPs that are doing this. It's not just the Labour MPs. It's the National Party, and I'm afraid to say the ACT Party, who let us down endlessly because they're putting their own ego and political interests and the ministry, because the ministry runs everything. They can't upset the ministry first, and the kids don't even figure in their calculation. They talk about the kids, but actually have no courage to do the right thing.
Nothing should happen in a school that is not for the benefit of the child.
Nothing. Nothing should happen in government that isn't the benefit for the kids. No, seriously, it is so disgusting to me.
Yeah.
I couldn't see it when I was there, but I can see it very clearly looking back, if you know what I mean. I have a greater clarity about politics and government than I had when I was there.
Yeah. So, I mean, one policy we really want to push, and I'm at this summit, I want to detail it. It requires a lot of public support, etc. But I read a book by a man called Eagleman, who is arguably the world's leading, at least probably the world's leading communicative neuroscientist. And he's out of Stanford, and he talks about the development of the human within the womb and the importance of the first 3 years in particular, and then, you know, clearly in New Zealand we go to 5 years. And I'd love us to do something, because we just know now something called Project 5.75, where we say, right, as soon as someone knows that they are pregnant, it is pervasive through society and highly supported that but they don't drink, they don't smoke, they don't do meth. And then there are other positives like having good rest, having good nutrition, minimising stress.
I could talk to you all morning. I know our listeners would love it. You are amazing. I admire you greatly. How do listeners who are interested in your online school find out about it?
If they just look up Mount Hobson Academy, they'll find it.
Mount Hobson Academy. Look, what you're doing and what you've done for kids is transformational. It breaks my heart that we're not learning from you, but then I shouldn't be surprised because it's a big bureaucracy and a big political machine that we're up against that runs education. We've got to run to the news. I hate that because you're only getting started and you are truly, we'll talk again. You and your wife are truly amazing. I commend anyone interested for their kids or for their general interest about education to go and Google Mount Hobson. Get it again, Mount Hobson Academy.
Yep.
Great work, Alwyn. Thank you so much. What a wonderful man. That was Alwyn.
Hey, my pleasure.
That was Alwyn Poole, who's just a great person, a great educationist, great father, great husband, great teacher, great leader. We're lucky to have him.